Morning sunlight spilled through the glass walls of the Langston Tower penthouse, catching on the edges of chrome and crystal. The air hummed with quiet power, the kind of silence money bought when everyone around you is too afraid to breathe wrong. Edward Langston stood at the center of it all, a statue in an immaculate charcoal suit, reviewing the morning's market data on the wall-sized display. The numbers shimmered in blues and greens, the language he'd worshipped for years. Profits, acquisitions, projections. The rhythm of control. A soft knock broke through his focus. His assistant, Miriam, entered with her usual tight smile. "Your driver's waiting, Mr. Langston. The press conference starts in 40. He nodded without turning. "Make sure the projection feed is flawless this time. I don't want another delay like last quarter." "Yes, sir." She hesitated, and the doctor called again. Said it was important. Edward's jaw flexed. "Tell him I'm busy." She opened her mouth as if to say more but thought better of it. The door closed behind her, leaving Edward alone with the faint buzz of machines. He coughed once, a dry, hacking sound that made him pause. For a second, the world tilted. He pressed a hand to his chest, steadying himself. The cough passed, leaving a dull ache beneath his ribs. Probably exhaustion, he told himself. Nothing more. Downstairs, the city churned in its usual chaos. Cameras flashed the moment he stepped from the car. The crowd parted as his security detail guided him through the lobby of the conference center. He was the architect of an empire, the man who'd turned code into gold. Everyone wanted a piece of his success, a photograph, a handshake, until they didn't. The stage lights were blinding. He took his place behind the podium, sleek and confident, voice smooth as glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today marks a new era for Langston Global. We are not just innovating technology, we are redefining the human experience." Applause. Cameras. The usual theater. He continued, weaving numbers into promises, spinning vision into applause lines. But halfway through his next sentence, a sharp pain shot through his chest. He faltered, words catching. A cough escaped, small at first, then relentless. The microphone amplified it cruelly. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Edward tried to steady himself. "Excuse me," he rasped, forcing a smile. He gripped the podium until his knuckles whitened. But the room was spinning now, his lungs burning. The cough deepened, tearing at his throat. He felt warmth on his palm. When he glanced down, it was streaked with red. Gasps. Someone shouted for help. The last thing he saw was the flash of cameras still clicking, still hungry for spectacle, even as his body crumpled to the floor. When he woke, the lights were softer, humming lower, the sterile glow of a hospital room. His chest felt heavy, wrapped tight in invisible cords. A figure in white moved at the edge of his vision. A doctor, speaking in a tone too calm to be comforting. "Mr. Langston," the doctor said, "you've been very ill. The tests show you have tuberculosis, advanced. It's serious, but we'll start treatment immediately." Edward blinked. Tuberculosis. The word sounded ancient, absurdly out of place in his world of innovation and wealth. "That's impossible. People don't get that anymore." "It's rare," the doctor said gently, "but not impossible. You've been ignoring symptoms for months. The stress, the travel, the lack of rest, it's taken a toll." Edward turned his face away. Outside the window, the city gleamed, indifferent, eternal. His phone vibrated on the side table, buzzing with messages. News headlines already spreading. "Billionaire collapses at conference." He closed his eyes. For the first time in decades, there was no meeting to rush to, no empire to command, no one waiting to take his orders. Just the sound of his own ragged breathing, shallow, uncertain, and a single, echoing thought he couldn't silence. What if this was the one thing money couldn't fix? The first thing Edward noticed when he woke again was the smell, antiseptic and lavender soap. Not the cold, metallic sterility of his city hospital, but something quieter, humbler. The ceiling above him was low and uneven, its paint cracked from years of moisture. Beyond the window, sunlight spilled across a line of pine trees swaying in slow rhythm. A bird sang somewhere. It was almost peaceful, if not for the ache in his chest and the soft hiss of oxygen beside him. A woman's voice floated through the room. "You're awake. Good." He turned his head, and there she was, a nurse in a pale blue uniform, her dark hair tied back neatly, her expression calm but alert. She was young, though her eyes carried an old patience. A small cross gleamed at her neck. "Where am I?" His voice came out hoarse, brittle. "Street, Augustine Sanatorium," she said. "Upstate. They transferred you here last night. The city doctors thought the air might help your lungs recover." He frowned. A sanatorium? You make it sound like I'm dying in the 19th century. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. You might say this place is a little old-fashioned. But it works. Fresh air, quiet, no reporters. He pushed himself up on his elbows, ignoring the sharp pull in his chest. Who authorized this? I didn't agree to be moved. The board did, I think. They said you needed isolation, for your health and everyone else's. He caught the hesitation in her voice. The board, of course. They'd acted quickly, hiding him away while they cleaned up the mess. So they've buried me alive, he muttered. Perfect. The nurse didn't answer. Instead, she began adjusting the drip at his bedside, her movements quiet and efficient. He watched her for a moment, the way she hummed under her breath, the way she seemed unbothered by his scorn. What's your name? He asked finally. Grace, she said simply. Grace Rivera. He gave a dry laugh. Grace. How fitting. You'll need some, she replied, glancing at him with a steady gaze that didn't flinch under his tone. No one ever spoke to him like that. For years, people around him had responded to power, not to him. But this woman, with her calm eyes and worn shoes, seemed immune to everything he represented. Do you know who I am? He asked. I do, she said. But right now, you're just another patient who needs rest. The words landed harder than he expected. He wanted to argue, to remind her that he was Edward Langston, a man whose name could shift markets, but his lungs betrayed him. He fell into a fit of coughing that left him trembling and pale. Grace was beside him in an instant, her hand steadying his shoulder, her voice low and sure. Breathe, she said softly. Slowly. That's it. Her touch was warm, firm, human. When the coughing eased, she handed him a glass of water. He took it without meeting her eyes, ashamed at the weakness he'd shown. Try to rest now, she said, pulling the thin blanket up to his chest. You've fought too long on your own. When she left, the room felt emptier. Edward stared at the doorway long after she was gone, his mind replaying her words. You're just another patient. For the first time in his life, that was true. And somewhere, beneath the weight of pride and sickness, a small part of him wondered if that might not be the beginning of something new. Days blurred into one another, soft mornings of mist and medicine, evenings of distant birds and the faint creak of floorboards. The sanatorium sat on a hill surrounded by pines, a world apart from the glass towers and digital noise Edward once ruled. At first, he counted the days like a prisoner, but soon he stopped. There was nothing to count toward. No meetings, no deadlines, no empire to control. Grace appeared every morning at 7 sharp. She moved quietly, always with purpose, her presence somehow steadying the air around her. She brought his meals, took his vitals, and checked his oxygen. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice carried warmth that lingered after she left. Edward, for his part, remained guarded. His pride bristled at the simplicity of the place, the peeling paint, the threadbare curtains, the communal meals served on mismatched trays. It all seemed like a cruel joke played on him by fate. And yet, as the weeks stretched on, he couldn't deny that something in him was softening. One afternoon, he found Grace tending to a line of small potted plants outside the ward, geraniums, herbs, and one frail little rose bush struggling for life. She was humming again, that same melody he'd heard on his first morning. You really think talking to plants does anything? He asked, standing at the doorway with his cane. She glanced over her shoulder. Maybe not, but it doesn't hurt to try. Everything responds to a little care. Care doesn't make things grow, he said. Resources do. Light, water, nutrients, that's what matters. Grace smiled faintly, and yet people with everything still wither. He had no answer for that. Later, as she helped him back to his room, he caught sight of her hands, rough from years of work, a faint burn scar across one wrist. You've done this a long time? He asked. Since I was 19, she said. My mother was a nurse, too. She used to say the world needs people who can sit beside pain without running from it. And you believe that? I have too. She adjusted his pillow and gave him a look that was both kind and unyielding. You can't heal what you won't face. That night, Edward couldn't sleep. The words echoed through him. For so long, he had faced everything by conquering it, illness, competition, fear. But this was different. This was something he couldn't overpower. The next morning, he found Grace reading to one of the older patients in the garden. Her voice floated across the courtyard, soft and rhythmic, carrying the story of a man who had lost everything and found peace by letting go. Edward lingered near the edge of the path, unseen. He didn't understand why he stayed, only that her voice made the air feel lighter. When she finished and turned, she saw him. "You should be resting," she said. He smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "I'm trying something new." "Oh, and what's that?" "Listening." Grace looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to believe him. Then she nodded once. "That's a good start, Mr. Langston." As she walked away, he noticed the smallest thing. The dying rosebush by the garden wall now had a single, fragile bud. And though he told himself it was coincidence, some part of him wondered if it had simply needed someone to believe it could still bloom. Winter melted slowly into spring, and with it came a quiet rhythm Edward had never known. The coughing fits grew less violent, his strength began to return, and the sharp weight of his anger dulled into something gentler, a kind of reflection. The sanatorium, once a place of exile, had become a strange sanctuary. Days began with birdsong and ended in soft golden light seeping through the curtains. For the first time in his life, time itself didn't feel like an enemy. Grace still came every morning, her steps light in the hallway. She no longer hovered as she once had, now she sat with him sometimes, sharing small pieces of her life, her village by the coast, her late parents, her dream of opening a small clinic for children who couldn't afford care. Edward listened, quietly absorbing every detail. It startled him how much he wanted to keep hearing her voice. "You could have done anything," he said one afternoon as they walked the garden path. "Why choose this?" Grace smiled faintly. "Because I'm good at being where people are hurting. Most of the time, that's enough." He stopped to catch his breath, leaning on his cane. "You think just being there makes a difference?" "It did for me once," she said softly. "Someone stayed when they didn't have to." He wanted to ask more, but the look in her eyes told him some stories were meant to remain sacred. That evening, as the wind rustled through the pines, Edward sat by his window and began writing. Not emails, not board orders, letters. To his estranged sister, to an old friend he'd betrayed in business, to employees he'd never thanked. The words came haltingly at first, then with a rush. Gratitude, regret, confession, all the things he'd buried beneath wealth. Grace found him there later, pen still in hand. "You've been busy," she said, eyeing the small pile of sealed envelopes. "Trying to fix what I can," he said. "Though I suspect I'm late." "It's never too late to be kind," she said, picking up one letter and smiling. "Even if it's just words." Weeks later, the doctor declared him officially recovered. "You'll need rest and discipline," the man said, "but you've made a remarkable turnaround." Edward knew better. It wasn't medicine alone that had healed him. It was something far less scientific, the quiet, persistent grace of another human being. On his last morning at the sanatorium, he went to find her, but Grace was gone. A colleague told him she'd left early that day, reassigned to a clinic overseas. There was no farewell note, no final moment. Just an empty chair by the rosebush that now bloomed fully, its petals opening to the light. He stood there for a long while, wind brushing through his hair, until he noticed a small folded card tucked beneath the pot. In simple handwriting, it read, "To heal is to love. Take care of your breath, Mr. Langston." It's a gift. Months later, in a quiet city park, Edward sat alone on a wooden bench watching children play. His cane rested by his knee, the note in his coat pocket. He drew in a deep breath, clean, steady, alive, and for the first time, he didn't think of the past or the empire he'd lost. He thought of the nurse with the steady hands and the patient heart, and how she had taught him that salvation didn't come from fortune or fame, but from the simple act of being seen, and learning, at last, to love.